Hello everyone, my name is Johnny Arredondo. I'm with Texas Parks and wildlife biologist for Kerr, Bandera, and Real counties here in the Edwards Plateau. Today I'm going to talk to you about supplemental shelter and provide some recommendations that may be useful to you on your property. So first of all, I always like to mention that nothing can supplement what the native habitat can provide, and that the best habitat or shelter for wildlife is provided by a well-managed habitat. However, there are some practices that can be implemented to provide types of shelter that may be limited in that habitat. So today I'm going to go over a few suggestions in regards to supplemental shelter. I'm going to talk about nest boxes for a variety of species, brush piles, fence line management, hay, meadow, and pasture cropland fields, and what you could do in regards to managing for wildlife. Talk about a technique called half cutting trees. Also discuss woody plant shrub establishment as well as natural cavity and snag development. Okay, let's first talk about nest boxes and or cavities, in which can provide nesting or denning habitat for selected species. First of all, you have to decide what species you want to manage for and know what their habitat needs and requirements are. For example, if birds don't nest in cavities in the wild, then they're probably not going to nest or utilize nest boxes. In fact, only about 80 species of birds nest in cavities. There are some species actually are considered ground nesters. If you were to go onto the website allaboutbirds.org and provide some information about a variety of species and the requirements. Nevertheless, if you decide to go with the nest box and provide that for certain species, a few things to consider are dimensions and features. Naturally, you want to get the good fitting box for that bird that you're looking for or you're trying to manage for. Also, you want to consider the placement of these boxes, how far apart do they need to be, as well as the height of them. You also want to consider about maintaining these bird boxes. You're going to have to do for birds, you're going to have to do it maybe early spring right before nesting period and maybe before bats, maybe do it right before wintertime before hibernation. If you decide to purchase your own nest box or maybe build your own, consider using untreated wood. Make sure it has an overhanging sloped roof, to let that water run off. Also, make sure the interiors of the walls are rough. It helps the bird construct its nest. If you look to the photograph on the right-hand side, there's a little mesh wire that's going to help establish that nest in that nest box. Also, have some a recessed floor with some drainage, just in case water does get in there, it could go through and doesn't build up. Also, have some ventilation near the top of the sides of the wall. Generally, the peak nesting season is during the summer months, and so it gets pretty hot. So you want to keep those nest boxes pretty cool. Some more information about nest boxes. The species I have listed there, again, it just depends on species you want to manage for. These species have a larger requirement of nest boxes, per area. I would suggest to go onto birds.cornell.edu to learn some more information about other species that you may be interested in and to determine what their requirement is. For the ones I have listed, generally about one nest box per acre is probably good practice. And the same goes for native bees and bats. If you go into the website, batcon.org, it's a good website and provides some good resources. Okay, let's talk about some nest boxes. You want to protect these nest boxes from predators. Some options here is to provide some guards. One example is you can utilize these stovepipe baffles. You can buy them at your local hardware store. You can mount these to the T-post on the inside with some mesh, with some wire or some type of ties on the inside. Another option would be a collared guard there at the bottom. Again, you can build those yourself or maybe purchase those somewhere online. Something else to consider when you're talking about bird boxes, these boxes are made out of wood, and so they're going to deteriorate over time. In addition, you're going to have other critters like squirrels and maybe woodpeckers pecking at those holes to make them larger. And so one thing we always recommend is put those little metal plates on there. Again, you can probably purchase those online if you look somewhere. Okay, let's change gears here a little bit. Let's talk about brush piles. Basically, this addresses the lack of understory or shrub habitat. It creates cover for wildlife. They're easily made from a monocultural stands of areas that are being thinned out. For example, in my neck of the woods, we have a lot of ash juniper, or also known as cedar. You can use these to stack up and make in a formation of like a teepee, nothing too big, maybe 4 to 5 feet in diameter as well as height. Usually about 5 brush piles per acre is good. Again, it provides understory habitat for songbirds, habitat for quail, reptiles, and insects, and other small mammals as well. Another option would be there at the drawing at the bottom. You could place logs like in a tic-tac-toe formation that provides a cool wet habitat for a lot of those insects and critters. So that could be another option for you. Another option here would be considered slash retention. It's very similar to like brush piles, but instead of stacking your trimmed off branches into a pile, you're basically just cutting and leaving where that brush lays. The minimum of 3% of the designated area must be treated annually to qualify. Again, this provides habitat for wildlife, plus provides a food source for other wildlife like raptors. Fence line management is another practice to consider. This basically is applicable where cover is limited, for example, cropland or tame pastures. A minimum requirement of 90 feet wide is required, and a minimum length of 300 feet per quarter mile of fence is required annually to qualify. Basically, if you were to buy a property or own a piece of property that maybe the previous owner ran some livestock on there in previous years that had some old fencing, a lot of times those fencing provides perch habitat for a lot of songbirds, which drop seeds in the ground, and there the plants and vegetation tend to grow up from there, and that provides habitat for wildlife. If you don't have old fence line, or if you created a new fence, a perimeter fence around a house or yard or something, you could also plant vegetation there, and that provides habitat as well. Okay, let's talk about hay meadow fields or pasture lands or croplands, things you could do to manage for wildlife. If you were to bale, if you're baling hay and you wanted to do that, things to consider would be mowing or baling to be postponed until after the peak period for the nesting season of birds and mammals. Generally, after July 31st would be a good date to start. If you do, use a wide bar on the front of the tractor at least 1 foot high to flush out wildlife. Mow and shred about a third of the open area per year in strips or mosaic pattern to create edge and structure diversity. We would also suggest to minimize weed control practices since they use as cover and food. Use a no-till or minimum till to leave waste grain on the ground, again for food for wildlife. This basically improves the plant diversity for grasses and forbs, and also benefits ground nesting birds and other animals as well. Okay, here's another technique that can be utilized. It's called half cutting trees or shrubs. This is generally done in the southern part of the state. You're not cutting the trees completely. You're basically cutting them in half and letting them lay over, almost like spokes of a wagon wheel. And basically, you're not killing them. You're providing regrowth and regeneration so they can provide cover for wildlife. This is best done in the early or middle part of the growing season. A minimum of 1 clump of tree or shrub per 50 yards on at least 10% of acreage, or 10 acres, whichever is smaller, done annually to qualify. Again, mesquite or hackberry trees do well with this procedure. In general, cutting about 5 to 10 trees over the size of a basketball court every 200 yards would suffice. Another option to consider will be woody plant and shrub establishment. This can be a little more costly. Planting should consist of native trees and shrubs that produce hard shaft mass or provide nesting or safe cover. Generally, this is done in areas where you have old croplands or pasture fields, and your limiting factor is vegetation or cover. Again, if you're to do this, you would want to plant them all together in clumps or in strips or mosaic patterns or mottes versus planting individual trees and produce that edge. Natural cavities and snag development is another option. I always say to try to utilize what you have on your habitat. In my part of the country, in Edwards Plateau, we have what they call oak wilt. And so you have a lot of these old dead trees and snags out there already, which provides habitat and nesting cover for wildlife. A minimum of 5 snags per acre on 5% of acreage must be done or retained and created annually to qualify. Now, if you don't have these natural snags that may have occurred through maybe dying through oak wilt or maybe an old wildfire passing through the area, you can create these snags. However, I don't recommend doing this on maybe trees like oak trees or maybe hickories that produce a soft mass. But basically, it's called girdling. You're basically killing the tree so that you can create this habitat for wildlife. That will end my presentation. I thank you for your time. Always remember to decide what species you want to manage for and understand the requirements. I look forward to your questions and answers later on. Thank you.